Good morning, and welcome to your morning cereal. Guess what day it is? Mike. Guess what day it is? Well, it's Wednesday, people, and good morning to you. Welcome to Hump Day. Did you know that the camel's character in the Geico commercials, the camel's name was Caleb? Again, the more you know. Hey, happy Disaster Day. Yep, that's exactly what it sounds like. It's for raising awareness and the importance of being prepared and proactive mitigants so that when disasters do happen, we're ready for them. Maybe a little easier to swallow is it's also National Chocolate Fondue Day. Still not exciting enough for you on this hump day? Well, it's also National Shower with a Friend Day. I'll let you look that one up, but it's actually much more G-rated than the name would suggest. But you do you. You know we encourage that on this show. On that note, let's go ahead and jump into today's quotes. One fun, nostalgic quote, and then a second quote to tease our book review here later in the episode. Hopefully, one of these quotes will speak to you and kickstart your day in a positive direction. Okay, the first quote is from the singer Boy George, and he said, quote, "My life hasn't always been a disaster. It's just that when it has, it's been a spectacular disaster." Well, ditto to that. That's part of life, right? There are ups and there's downs. The key is to learn from them and to keep moving forward. And today's teaser quote from the book review is, quote, "The life of many a person could probably be changed if only someone would make him feel important," end quote. As usual, we'll unpack that here in just a few minutes during the book review segment, but first, let's go ahead and jump into our usual dose of fun and historic facts from this day in history. Today's news, facts, and birthdays are for January 5th. Okay, way back in 1869, the biggest gold nugget in history was found. It was named the Welcome Stranger, and it was discovered in Molokai, Australia. It had a gross weight of 173 pounds. I once found a $5 bill once on the ground, and I was pretty happy about that. Moving on, in 1909, the world's first synthetic plastic was developed by Belgian chemist Leo Baekeland. In 1934, baseball legend Hank Aaron was born. In 1936, the movie Modern Times, it was the silent film directed and written and starring Charlie Chaplin. It was released. You'll remember the scene of Charlie Chaplin as a factory worker working in a room with these huge wheeled cogs. In 1969, the United States population reached 200 million. Today, it's estimated at between 337 and 347 million. In 1983, Def Leppard's album Pyromania started a 92-week run on the U.S. charts. Although it never reached number one, but it sold over 6 million copies in the U.S. alone. In 2003, the U.S. Secretary of State, Colin Powell, he appeared before the United Nations Security Council to present evidence that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, and it posed an immediate danger. And then finally, in 2004, Janet Jackson, she became the most searched for image in the history of the internet, just a few days after Jackson's and Justin Timberlake's Super Bowl show Wardrobe Malfunction. And happy birthday to you if today is your birthday. You share a birthday with Brazilian soccer player Neymar, he's 33, and fellow soccer player, Portuguese soccer player Cristiano Ronaldo, he turns 40 today. Singer Bobby Brown, I'm not sure if it's his prerogative, but he's 56 today. And then actress Laura Linney, she's 61. You might remember her from shows like Ozark and Love Actually. And the number one movie on this date in 2000 was Scream 3. A classic Wes Craven thriller and sort of a middle child movie because there were 7 movies in the franchise. At the time of its release, Scream 3 broke the record for the most amount of screens it was showing on in its opening weekend, 3,467, if that means anything to you. By comparison, the movie Titanic was shown on 2,674 screens during its opening weekend. Well, because of national events happening around the time of its release, the movie company reduced the amount of on-screen violence and blood. The film used only 10 gallons of fake blood compared to 50 gallons of fake blood in the first Scream movie. The number one song on this date back in 1984 was Karma Chameleon by Culture Club. This is another quintessential iconic 80s song. Some of the best music ever came from this decade. Well, interestingly, Boy George, who wrote this song while he was in Egypt, as a side note, he had to fight to get this song onto the CD because the rest of the band hated it. But Boy George says it's about the alienation people fear if they stand up to others. And instead, you just kiss up to everyone and you aren't true to yourself or you don't act like yourself. Then you get karma justice. And that's the meaning behind the song. Okay, that's way deeper than I thought this song was. I really need to start listening to the lyrics more closely. Great song and a great transition to some personal growth in the book review segment of the morning serial. As you know, this is where we take a few moments to reflect on lessons learned from the current book we're reading. And currently, we're reading through Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a timeless book that's consistently on all the must-read lists, and it's packed with rock-solid advice and actions for all of us to use and to build healthy foundational concepts to live by. Yesterday, we were still in Chapter 6 of Part 2, which is entitled How to Make People Like You Instantly. And Carnegie is reminding us that, quote, the desire to be important is the deepest urge in human nature, end quote. He is hammering home the philosophy of treating others as we would like to be treated by handing out sincere appreciation, because that, along with some basic good manners, can open countless doors, because appreciation feeds our need to feel important. Quote, the life of many a person could probably be changed if only someone would make him feel important, end quote. That's a quote from Ronald Rowland, an instructor of Carnegie's courses in California. And Carnegie shares a letter that Rowland had written him about a student in one of his classes. Rowland taught other classes, and one of them was an advanced class that had become a bit of a status symbol and a privilege for a student to be accepted in. Well, one day, Rowland approached a shy boy who Rowland thought he, quote, had an inner fire deep inside him, but was often overlooked because of his quiet, shy nature. The boy was shocked and said, "Who, me?" when Rowland asked him if he'd like to join the advanced class. "Am I good enough?" asked the boy. And Rowland replied, "Yes, you are good enough," end quote. Rowland had to turn and leave at that point because tears were coming into his eyes, as they were in the boy's eyes as well. Rowland wrote to Carnegie that boy taught him a lesson he would never forget, quote, our deep desire to feel important, end quote. Carnegie follows up the story with a bit of straight talk, and he says, quote, the unvarnished truth is that almost all other people you meet feel themselves superior to you in some way, end quote. And Carnegie is showing us that the guaranteed way to win someone over, again, in a genuine and sincere way, is to show that person through subtle actions and comments that you recognize their importance. And Carnegie again reminds us what Emerson said earlier in the book, quote, every man I meet is my superior in some way. In that, I learn of him, end quote. Carnegie's straight talk continues when he calls out those people that feel the need to let everyone else know just how important they are, and they toot their own horns constantly. Of these types of people that we all know, Carnegie says this, quote, and the pathetic part of it is that frequently those who have the least justification for a feeling of achievement bolster up their egos by a show of tumult, bragging and building themselves up, and conceit, which is truly nauseating, end quote. Carnegie gives a couple short examples in the book about how even just little acts of honest appreciation for someone can open up a spring of gratitude. In the first example, a husband was visiting his wife's aunt, clearly a well-off aunt who was older and widowed. When left alone with her, he looked for something to admire and spoke to her of how beautiful her house was. Well, she told him about how her husband and she had designed it and how they filled it with special items from their travels, and she spoke to him of the love that once filled the house. And she took him to the garage where there was a basically new car up on a lift that her husband had bought her before he passed away. And she said she was going to give it to him. Why? Because she said he appreciated beautiful things and she wanted it to go to someone who would appreciate it. Carnegie says she wanted a little genuine appreciation. She was craving human warmth, and when she got that from him, her gratitude poured out and could only be expressed by insisting on giving him this new car. In the second story, a man who had also taken Carnegie's class on how to win friends and influence people, well, this man was a landscaper, and the owner came out of his house to give him a few instructions. The landscaper was aware of the owner's hobby, which was breeding award-winning dogs, and he mentioned that he admired the owner's beautiful dogs and acknowledged that he knew that he had won many blue ribbons. Well, the owner spent nearly an hour and a half with the landscaper talking about his hobby, and in the end, he gave the landscaper a puppy to take home to his young son, and all because, quote, I had expressed my honest appreciation for his hobby and his achievements, end quote. In a chapter entitled How to Make People Like You, Carnegie again is hitting home this notion of finding something to admire about a person and genuinely letting them know about it. And in doing so, we unlock a great gift for the other person, giving them a feeling of importance, and also winning a friend over for ourselves. Tomorrow, we'll finish Chapter 6 and learn Carnegie's final principle of Part 2. And we'll also hear a story about the power of appreciation that talks about George Eastman. He's the inventor of Kodak film, who is worth hundreds of millions of dollars even back then. So be sure to come back tomorrow and join us for those discussions. Okay, take a moment to find something to admire about others today. Start letting those new habits take root. All right, get out there. Have a great hump day. You're on the downhill side of the week nearly. Stay focused, stay positive, and you'll make it. Thanks again for joining us today. Come back tomorrow as we learn principle number 6, and have a fantastic day. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Morning Serial podcast on the One Life Live It channel. You can find more episodes and videos by visiting our YouTube channel and the website at Sean Inglis and at SeanInglis.com, where you can also follow our other podcasts, the Mr. and Mrs. Inglis podcast and the Life Happens podcast. In these other podcasts, we'll dive deeper into everyday issues, self-improvement and well-being, business and finance, and we welcome special guests too. So join us. It'll be a good time, I promise. Thanks again for listening. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you tomorrow.